guys would meet us, and we've been, unfortunately, there have been some unfortunate circumstances beyond our control that caused us to put this off. So what I'd like to do is have you guys have a presentation to go and, you know, tell us about the code.
Yes, sir.
To attend, and then what we have some written statements, and then we have statements that are not, so we can give you those questions that we have also, okay?
Okay. So if we can, I'd like to,
Oh, yeah, you want to pray, lead us in prayer, sir?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, just once again, we come saying thank you for such a beautiful day that you allowed us to be a part of. And so, Father, as we come this evening, we ask that you open up our minds and our hearts, that as we discuss, as we go over issues, Father, that whatever we do will be pleasing in your eyesight, that we do everything that will be to your glory. And Father, again, we just thank you for this opportunity to dialogue, to just talk and to hatch things out and to work things for the better good of those who love you, call according to your purpose. Father, again, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for your blessing each and every one that's gathered here today. And Father, we send up a special prayer for those who have lost their lives because of the storms. Father, those who have lost their lives because of other circumstances. We ask now that you touch those families, that you strengthen those families, you build them back up where they're torn down. Father, we know that all things are possible through you. And so, Father, we just give you the glory. These and other blessings we ask of you in your holy name we pray.
Amen.
amen. All right, so I think before we get started, maybe we'll do some introductions of us. That way you kind of know who's sitting at the table. And the reason I say that is although code enforcement is bringing this new property maintenance code forward, there's a lot of aspects of it that are not part of code enforcement. They're other divisions. So with that being said, I'd like to come just do some introductions.
Can I do first? My name is Gene DeLauro. I'm the building official for the city of Corpus Christi. I work in the Development Services Department.
My name is Buck Bryce. I'm an assistant city attorney, and I'm with the city attorney's office. I'm a legal advisor to the police department and code as well.
Excuse me.
Sir, yeah.
I'm Commander Santiago Escalante. I think most of you have met me before. I'm right under Chief Markle, and of course I'm in charge of the Investigations Bureau.
And he's my boss. So. David Blackman, Captain, Police Department, and I oversee code enforcement.
I'm Tracy Cantu. I'm the administrator for code enforcement. I report to Captain Blackman.
Andy Montes, code supervisor for the code enforcement center.
All right, I'm Guy Nicholson. I run a foundation here that works in the community, been in the community for about 30-some years, working in the community and concerned about what's happening in our community, and so.
I'm Samuel Jackson. I'm a resident of Hillcrest. Been here for over 30-some years now. Married to this lady here that's been here over 60 years. So we're here to see what we need to do.
I'm Lamont Taylor. I'm a resident of Hillcrest, and I've been here 55, 60 years.
I'm Peter McGraw. I work for Texas Bureau of Grande Legal Aid. I'm an attorney here, and I've handled a couple of code enforcement cases, and just here to get more information about the process.
I am Jarvis Webb, a resident of Hillcrest. All my adult life I lived up north, but I'm now back here, and it's good to be back in Corpus.
I'm Daniel Pena, also a resident of Hillcrest, part of the Hillcrest Resident Association, and part of the Alliance here.
My name's Errol Summerlin. I'm a ex-legal aid lawyer, I guess, and I've been working with the Alliance for the last 6, 7 months, I guess.
You're at the perfect timing, Henry. Introduce yourself.
Voluntarily, by the way, just so you know.
Introduce yourself.
They're not paying me to be here.
Henry Williams.
You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Gloria Hernandez. I live at 2002 Kennedy Avenue. Been there since '54.
Awesome. Well, it's good to meet all of y'all. There's some of y'all that I already know, and there's a couple new faces, and it's good to meet you. I know there's a lot of y'all that talk about how long y'all have lived in the Hillcrest area and in Corpus Christi natives, and you know, I appreciate the dedication that y'all have to your neighborhood. And myself, I'm a lifelong resident of Corpus Christi, actually a third generation Corpus Christian, so I have a vested interest in this community. So that's something I wanted to say before we got started here. You know, what we're going to talk about here and what my feelings are truly my feelings. There's not an ulterior motive for me. You know, Chief Simpson put me in this position because he believed I was an ethical person, and we both kind of had the same vision. And the vision is to clean up Corpus Christi, to reduce crime and make it a place where our children and grandchildren can be proud to live. So that is my mission. So with that being said, talk a little bit about this property maintenance code. The reason we're doing this, updating the property maintenance code, and I know y'all probably heard this before, but I think it's worth saying again, is the current property maintenance code, which is the Southern Standards one, was adopted in 1973. To put that kind of in perspective, that was several years before the Vietnam War was over. So if you think about how old that property maintenance code is, there's a lot of things that are outdated. The wording is ambiguous at best, and so there needs to be some clarification to it. And that's the reason we're bringing forth this code. This code is not as much about creating new codes that are going to create hardships on the residents of Corpus Christi as it is about clearing up wording and working better with existing codes that we have in the city. And when I say existing codes we have in the city, and that's the reason I have Gene DeLauro here from Development Services, because code enforcement enforces codes. We enforce other departments' codes. Development Services codes, the Building Standards Code, the fire code, even parts of the electric code. So all of these codes are housed in different departments within the city. And so they look to us to enforce them because we are code enforcement. And the wording of our current Southern Standards Code, the 1973 version, is so outdated that it doesn't read with these adopted codes. And Gene will expand on this a little bit later, but the electric code, the fire code, the plumbing code, the building code, all of those are working under a 2009 version of the International Property Maintenance Code. So the reason that we're hoping to adopt this 2009 version is so that all of these codes will read together. And once we get that adopted, then we can all work to move into the next one, which is the 15. So at that point, all the codes in the city, all the reading, everything will be unified, and the ambiguity will be eliminated. And my hope is that the residents of Corpus Christi will have a better product. I mean, code enforcement, you know, and now the police department, we're constantly being asked, hey, why aren't we doing this, or why aren't we doing that, or why are we doing this? Because the wording is very confusing, and they're right. Because these outdated codes, it's hard for anybody to read. So this clarifies a bunch of those issues. There's a lot of things in here, and we'll get into these in a few minutes, that on the surface it looks like we're trying to add some things, but we're not. There are already existing ordinances and codes that already exist, whether it's in the house, in the building standards code, or whether it's already in our current ordinances. All we're doing is we're simply moving it over into this current one so that it's all housed in one location. We're not creating new ordinances or new building codes to create a hardship on the citizens of Corpus Christi. The last thing I would like to do, like I said, I'm a third generation Corpus Christian. I have parents that live here. I have grandparents that live here. My goal is not to create a hardship for the citizens. It's to create an atmosphere that's pleasant to live in. But in order to fix issues, we have to be able to identify them. And if we can't identify them, then we can't fix them. And those are done through clear and concise codes. Once they're identified, then we look for ways to fix them, and that's through community outreach programs. If they're elderly, disabled veterans, there's the community in general. We as community partners, all of us, I think, have a duty within our community to help our neighbors. So, but if we can't identify them, then we can't look to fix them. And that's kind of my opening deal, so we can get started. Tracy, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Captain Blackman really, hit the nail on the head. Like I said, it's not the intent to create hardships. We're not looking to bring about new codes that will cause issues. Like I said, it's mainly to create some clarification. There has to be a standard, and like I said, we're not trying to change that. And so regardless of when your house is built, there was a standard at the time that the house was built, and as long as it remains in that condition, it's at code. It's when their problems arise that we need to fix it, and that's when we need to be able to talk with these other departments so that we can correct those issues and establish better living conditions for the citizens. So, that's really, I think, the true intent of doing this, so that everything works together.
So one of the things we're looking at doing is making sure that everyone has access to these codes. And so one of the things that the property maintenance code, the city has purchased a license to be able to, for that code to be available online. In general, building codes, plumbing codes, mechanical, electrical codes, if you try to do a search for those codes, you're not going to find them, because they're the body that does the codes, the International Code Council, sells, that's what their business is. They create and sell codes to municipalities, contractors, whoever wants to buy them. So you can't find that information online. One of the things we're going to do two things. We're going to get a license from ICC to publish all the codes electronically, so they're available online for everyone. The other thing we're going to do is purchase a set of paper-backed codes and put one in each library throughout the city for those folks that don't have internet access. There's been some question about the older codes and how we have access to those. So if your home was built in 1950, it was built under a standard probably in the late 40s, and that code's about that thick. And if you look at, I've got a library, and if you look at the timelines, every year these books get bigger and bigger and bigger, and now they look like telephone books, literally, for the new 2015 codes. But the standard that you're required to maintain is the standard upon which your home was built. So I just want to make it very clear, there's nothing here that would require anyone to upgrade their home to today's standards. That would be impossible and ridiculous. But it does ask you that you maintain it to that 1950 standard that it was built to. And we've got access to codes back to about early 30s is about what we have. We don't have anything before then. So if it was built before then, I don't know what you do. But we cannot really make those codes available. Those codes will be housed in development services. And if anyone needed a copy of that, we would surely be able to provide that to them. But there's only one copy that the city owns, and I'm very reluctant to put that out in the library. So I think I will maintain that control of those earlier codes in our office. But they're available to the public. There's folks in our office that would do research on anyone's behalf that asked if you had a question about what was required at a certain timeline. We would look it up and get you that information. So I just wanted to be clear about that. The ICC publishes a family of codes. There's 14 codes, one of which is the property maintenance code. The city adopted about 7 or 8 of the codes. They didn't adopt the property maintenance code. And these codes are designed to work in conjunction with one another. So without having this property maintenance code as part of our thing, what they're trying to do with that 1973 standard is not meshing with the current codes. And the last thing I'll say is that we're going to be going to the 2015 code next year. We're at the 2009 today. The reason why it's very important for the city to keep codes current is because insurance companies look at every city and they provide what they call an ISO rating. It's a rating of the community. And the newer codes that we adopt, the lower the insurance rate, homeowners insurance rates are for the community as a whole. Because you think if I'm Allstate and I go to a city and they're adopted the 1997 code, and here it is 2015, I'm probably going to want a higher insurance rate on a home because you're using such an outdated code. The closer we keep to the published codes, the newer codes, the lower the insurance premiums will be for the entire community. So it's our goal as a department and as a city to try to keep these codes current.
And, and when we talk about the codes, I think we all have a vision that, we all live here in Corpus Christi, and many of us have lived here our whole lives for reasons is that we love Corpus Christi, and we, you know, we don't want to be seen as a city that is not progressive when it comes to safety, our code issues. We don't want outdated codes for, when we have people that want to move to Corpus Christi, and you have businesses that start doing research on backgrounds and governments and say, okay, what kind of codes and standards do they have? I mean, you know, we want to be progressive when it comes to our codes, and in the end, I mean, Corpus Christi, we want to grow. We want to relieve burden for our not only our elderly residents, but our residents in general. From, you know, the more tax-paying citizens we have, and a more attractive community we have, you know, the better it is for all of us. And like Gene had said on the codes, if your house was built in 1950, you just have to maintain your code to the 1950 standards. I can tell you that code enforcement, we have 18 code enforcement officers for 150 square miles of city. We're not going around looking to see if you have a 2x6 piece of siding on your house as opposed to a 1940s where you only had this. Y'all see the city. We have our work cut out for us. If we're looking at a residence, it's because the residence is deteriorated. There's issues with it where it's a health and a safety hazard, and things that overall need to be repaired, whether it's the roof or issues that not only make it a safety hazard for that resident that lives there, whether they own it or whether they're renting, because if they're renting, they deserve to have a structure that is safe and inhabitable just like anybody else. But also, the person that lives next door to this property deserve to live next door to a house that is also safe and free of animals and whatever other critters may be in this structure because they're substandard. So in those issues, then obviously we're going to have to look at the code and say, okay, so what needs to be done with this structure? But in general, we're not driving around looking to see if everybody's codes are up to the standard of the time when it was built. I'll be honest with you, even if we wanted to do that, we don't have the manpower to do it. That is, you know, not even on my list. So, all right, so that being said, some of the questions that we had, we went ahead and thought we'd bring forward to discuss. That way, hopefully, we can answer some of the questions for y'all before we have to get too far into them. We provided them with the exemption thing, right? Okay. So this one, this piece of paper we gave y'all with, it had the intent on it, and basically it's what I said. It's that the structure needs to be safe and comply with the provisions. And when it says it's provisions, it's pretty much that it needs to be a safe structure that's inhabitable. And if there are corrections that need to be made to it, then it needs to be done with the standards of the time when it was built. So there was a question so where is our wording for the exemption that shows that we only have to maintain our codes for the time when it was built? Well, that's on the second page, right? Okay. I'm sorry. Here we go. All right. Thank you. I got several different copies here. Okay, so the existing structures on the second page, it shows that obviously, and that's what the wording that says that y'all structures only have to be maintained to the code of the time. So just to kind of relieve everybody's worries, and this is actually in wording that shows that's the standard that you have to meet. We're not going to come back to you and say, hey, you have to meet the current code. Now, if you do any additions, any major renovations, then obviously they have to be done to the code of the time. And so,
And this is already adopted
yes.
by the city when we adopted the 2009 residential code. That's where this language is taken out of. So this is not anything new. This is existing language that's already been adopted. So I just want to certainly make that clear that it would be unwieldy for people to have to upgrade buildings as they age, and it's not the intent. If you do anything new, obviously, we would want that new work to comply with current standards, but anything that is existing is just that, existing, and is allowed to remain as is.
I mean, we're looking to, I'm sorry, just looking to maintain houses in a safe manner, you know, so regardless of when it was built, I mean, if you were to have electrical problems, let's say you got a light switch that's bad, you know, regardless of when it was built, I mean, that does need to be corrected. We don't want it to start a fire, we don't want it to cause a problem for you. So there is a minimum level it's gotta be repaired, you know, regardless of when the house was built, and that's, you know, where this all gets us, is just making sure that, you know, residences are safe for their occupants, whether they're renters, whether they're owners, or whomever. You know, we, you know, wanna prevent fires, we wanna make places safe for people to reside in, you know, and so that's what our goal is.
Yes, sir.
Since we're talking about this particular provision, the R102.7.1 says that if those additions or alterations to a structure are needed, they shall conform without requiring the existing structure to comply with all the requirements of this code. Now, I just want to make certain that we understand what that means. If we have an electrical problem, such as you suggested, and that's required to be repaired and brought up to code, at what point can the code enforcement official then start looking at, say, the water heater? And, no, now you gotta bring up the water heater to code. This plumbing fixture is not up to code. So, you know, at some point, I guess what I'm trying to make certain is that if a violation is found, let's say with regard to electrical, how far does the code enforcement individual go in looking at the rest of the home and seeing, well, now we've got a plumbing, fixture that needs to be brought up to code. We have a water heater that has to now be brought up to code.
Right.
You know, here it says, you don't, if it's a wiring, if it's a wiring issue, we only have to address the wiring, right? And not anything else.
And I don't.
Is that your interpretation?
Yeah, 'cause I think
Before he goes there, how do you know if I don't let you in my house that I have an electrical issue? All right, so how you get in my house to look at my wiring if I'm a senior citizen and all that, would you come and help me with my light bulb? You don't get in my house. I'm the senior citizen, so in essence, for you to see that I have a plumbing problem, that I have a foundation issue, that I have this issue, hey, I don't want you in my house, period, all right? So does that give you the opportunity to come in and start snooping around?
No, it doesn't. If the house is structurally sound, the code enforcement doesn't have any probable cause to just go and say, let me inspect your wiring, because there's no reason for that. A lot of times, like the electrical, when the probable cause is gonna arise, it's gonna be the landlord-tenant situation, where you have a bad landlord and he rents you a bad house with bad electrical, and then you call code enforcement and you're like, hey, my landlord won't fix my electric, this is dangerous. Then they have probable cause, you let them in, but you're right. The senior citizen whose house, from the outside looks good, there's no way code enforcement would know or even try to find out whether the wiring's bad.
Yeah, and that's, and I said this earlier, and I think it's worth saying several times, is that's not the intent of our, not only is it not the intent of this code, because these things that we're talking about, the wiring, and all, they're already existent. They're already existent in the electric code, the building code. These items aren't new that we're bringing in here. We're just merging them over into an updated version. So all of these things that we're saying, okay, well, we may not want this code because it says that there may be a standard for wiring, or, now if I have a water, all those things are existing already. They're not new codes. They're just being merged over into a newer version that the wording is clearer and talks with these other codes, updated codes clearer. So we're not creating new codes. They're already existing. So,
I understand that.
yeah,
I
so,
understand
and that being said, Mr. Taylor, we're there to make properties safe for the residents, the renters, the owners. And like I was talking about, going around and we just don't have enough people. If there's a structure that is clear from the outside and we're not asked to go in and say, hey, can you inspect my house to make sure this property's, we have no desire to do it, and we don't have the time to do it. I mean, clear, plain and simple. I mean, we're not the Gestapo. I mean, we're not, I mean, I can't make,
Thank you.
There are things that are out in the open that are clear, violations. You have tall weeds, okay? You got trash in your yard, you might have a junk car. So those are the things that we're gonna see, we're visible from the right of way. Anybody can see that in the public. And so then we have the authority to address those. But like I said, coming into your home, if you don't want us there, and there's not any reason for us to be there, again, we don't have time to do that if we wanted to, okay? We're trying to address the cases. I mean, we in code enforcement, we inspect at least 1,000 cases a month, okay? That's, with 18 people, and so we're trying to address the things that are, health and safety violations first, okay? We wanna, and clean up the city, and like I said, so, your house, if you're content with it, and there's not anything that causes a reason for us to have to be there, then we have no business being there.
And what bothers me is, and I'll be very honest with you, is when we're not able to do something because we don't have the tools to do it. And it's like we've always said, that public servants, we're there to provide a service to the community. In order to do that, we have to have the proper tools to do it. And when a resident says, I can't believe you can't get this drug dealer out of our house that lives next door to us, that kind of things bother me. So, when we have clear and concise. Yeah. Well, but you know what, my point is, and this is when I took over code enforcement, I'll tell you right now, this is kind of selfish of me, is I think the removing and baiting these problem houses is important, but to me and Commander Escalante and the chief, it's to reduce crime. And this is a great tool for, and I know since the police department took over, I'm sure y'all have seen code enforcement on TV, part is going in after drug raids and stuff, is where we're actually, these houses that have been problems for the community for 20 years, we're going in and we're shutting them down, and they're being resold to people that are rehabilitating them and putting progressive people in. It's because that we're using codes that are available to us. So it's, that's my selfish part, is to use clear and concise codes to reduce crime and to help out the community. It's not to go into people's houses and say, okay, you have a electrical plate that's cracked, and oh, by the way, your water heater is leaking water or whatever. To be honest with you, it doesn't matter to me. The only way it would matter to me is if it's a way for us to help somebody that lives there.
Sure.
I just want to try to address your question, because this typically was what happened. A home, let's stick with the 1950 home. There's a small electrical fire, and the fire department's called out. And AEP is probably going to de-energize that building until an electrician goes out and determines the problem. And they'll get a permit from Development Services, an electrical permit to make the repair on that 1950 home. We would not, under any circumstance, require any inspector or code enforcement officer to start looking at the plumbing or the mechanical system or the stairways or the doors or the windows or anything else. We're there for an electrical fire. We're there to repair an electrical problem that caused the fire. As soon as we get that repaired, we're out of there. There's nothing under any of these codes that requires us to go in, once we're in a building, start looking for all these things. Now, if I'm in my inspector days, if I went into a home and it didn't have a smoke detector, it didn't matter why I was there. I could be there for a plumbing inspection. But if I noticed you didn't have a smoke detector, I would probably let you know that it's probably a good idea to get a smoke detector. I wouldn't fail your inspection, because I was there for the plumbing. Smoke detector's got nothing to do with plumbing. But I'm gonna make sure you know that you probably need to get a smoke detector. So we might suggest some things that based on what we see, but we wouldn't require something unless it was related to the issue of why we were there, which was essentially to either look at the electric because it caused the fire and we're trying to repair that. So.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
You had mentioned reasonable cause just a minute ago. Let me just ask you from the perspective of the individual code enforcement official, the code official, I'll call him. Can you give us some examples of what you might see outside that would require you to have the right to go inside. Like, and I'm just gonna say, you've got, and let me preface this with the fact that we understand that, that you need to conform or try and bring this code up to snuff. But, and you continue to assert, and it's true that, you know, these have been in existence for a while.
Right.
The important thing is, though, is that this, what y'all are proposing, is being brought to the council now for adoption. And that means that everything in there, even if it's existed for 30 years, everything in there is subject to scrutiny, okay? Which brings me, I just want you to know that we understand
Right.
that they've been in existence for a while, but because it's opened up now, you know, going before the city council to repeal and then adopt, then it opens up everything that's on the table. Everything is on the table at that point. So let's say, for instance, there's a provision, and I'm not going, well, it's in 304.14, which says you gotta have insect screens, okay? Now, and another one talks about no crack windows or holes in the windows, okay? That's 304.13.1. You gotta have clean windows under 305.3, okay? Do any of those things give rise, if the code enforcement official sees a cracked window that's not watertight now, and so it's in violation, at what point, as you're looking at the exterior, does the officer on the beat say, I have reasonable cause to believe that there may be violations inside the house such that that individual would go and knock on the door and ask to come in?
Right. And
Well, I mean, a broken window in of itself is not necessarily a reason to go into a house. Obviously, it would, you know, give us cause to say, you probably need to get that window fixed for one reason or another. It needs to be weathertight. You want to prevent the elements from coming in. You want to prevent moisture, mold, all the things that could result from having a broken window. Those are things we're going to suggest. Something that might lead us to want to request consent to enter a house is, let's say we have standing water under a house. You have stagnant water where we have not had a rain event. That would lead me to believe that there may be a plumbing issue with the house. You have leaky pipes. Maybe it has an odor. Maybe it's a sewage pipe. You know, those are the reasons we would want to investigate the root cause of that, so that we can correct that issue for not only the resident, but also the neighbors who live by there that might be dealing with a raw sewage issue that now could affect the neighboring property. If it continues to leak and it flows into the neighbor's property, it flows out to the street, we want to address that root cause. So if it's, and in that point, we would invite other departments to take a look at it, because maybe it's a break on the city side. You know, if it is, we need to get that fixed. But that could be a possible reason to ask for consent to go in, because if you have an interior, you know, plumbing problem that's resulted in that leak, that's something we would want to investigate. You know, but, you know, just a broken window, I can see that from the outside. I don't need to go in to see that it's broken. I don't really have a reason to enter the home to look at a broken window. You know.
So those instances then where you've got a fence that's bad, you know, that's bent.
Right.
Where you've got no screens, those are clear violations under this code. And one of the things that we're gonna ask you to do is remove some of those, because some of those cities that have adopted have specifically excluded things like screens on the windows. And so, you know, our position is, why even have it in there? Just like these other cities that have excluded it, because there are many, many homes built without screens. But getting back to my original point is that you're saying that those particular items that a code enforcement officer might see would not give that officer reasonable cause to be able to knock on the door and go in. right?
Well, I'll give you an example of each,
Oh,
okay?
okay,
And
yeah.
in any case, I mean, I'm gonna knock on the door, I wanna make contact with them, I'd like to talk to those folks and see what's going on with them, okay? I still don't need to ask to go in, but, you know, talk to them, ask them, you know, about their situation, what's going on, and were they aware that they had a broken window? They may not be aware of that, you know, that's a safety issue as well. Like Gene said, I mean, you know, if you notice something, like a missing, a smoke detector, it's just something you wanna mention to somebody to assist with their, you know, their own personal safety and safeguard, you know, and so if you can fix a window, you prevent a number of other problems, and I don't have to go into the home in order to prevent several other issues, like I said, but I gave you an example of one where we wouldn't need to and one where we did.
And I think one of the biggest negative aspects about code enforcement that we received when the police department took over was, and I'll be painfully honest and make fun of Tracy, was that code enforcement had actually got the reputation, and they called them thieves in the night, because they would go up there and they would see a code violation and they would put a placard or whatever on the property saying, you have a broken window, or your fence is messed up, and never talk to a code enforcement officer. I think that's bad business, you know, and I think, just like Tracy said, if there is a code issue, then the code officer should be making an attempt to talk to the resident that lives there. Number one, to let them know that there is an ordinance or is a building standards code that, you know, requires a standard for this particular violation, and, you know, what do we need to do to get it resolved? It's you know, we're not there to play gotcha, we're there to resolve the problem. And if knocking on the door and asking these people and making sure they're aware of it, and if they said, hey, yeah, I wasn't aware, we can get this fixed and it's resolved that way, then hey, that's awesome for us, that's good for everybody in the community. But like Tracy said, there's a big difference between what's visible to the eye and what we perceive is a problem in the inside. And I think the sewage one was a good example. You know, electrical wiring sparking, if it keeps, you know, kicking breakers and the CP&L's having problems or something, then there may be a clue that, hey, there's more going on here that's a safety concern, not only for this resident that lives there, but the neighbors that live next to it. So, you know, there are gonna be instances where the code officer is gonna ask, you know, if they can come inside to correct whatever that issue is. It's not, the visible ones aren't probable cause to try to get into a house. That's not what it is. And if the ones that are the most serious, then we will do what's called an administrative warrant on stuff where if it's serious enough, then you know, if we need to get warrants, we'll get warrants to go in. But it's not. There's a big difference between addressing what's visible to the eye and what's the underlying problem inside a house. The ones that are the problem offenders, the absentee landlords and stuff, they're gonna be the ones that these warrants are that we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to do more work, because there are properties that are not maintained by people. They're just there to make a quick buck off of people who can't afford something better, and so they don't think they have to provide a better service to these residents. And and I'm here to tell you, and Tracy, that's not the case. These people are gonna be held accountable. It's not for the residents who live in these communities and have lived there forever and don't have screens on their windows. Ironically, if it was built to a standard where they didn't have to have screens, then they don't have to have screens.
But that's not, and that doesn't specifically say.
It's any
in the
part of.
fences, you're saying that this provision here would prevent the enforcement of the screen.
If it's built to a code at the time where it didn't have to have screens, then it doesn't have to have screens. It should be clear at the time when that house was built, if it doesn't have screens on the windows and it wasn't made for screens, then it doesn't have, because it wasn't the code of the time.
It may be, while you have this general application here, you know, if that's the case, then, you know, at the beginning of wherever the screens are at 304, section 304 doesn't have that specific, you know, qualification. If built, then you don't have to have screens. If built lawfully, then you don't have to have, you know,
And
It's kind of redundant, because you could pick anything in this and say, well, it doesn't have this predicate in front of it. I mean, this applies to any item in the International Code family.
And that's the reason
So-
for adopting this code, is because they talk to each other, so that this exemption speaks to this whole book. Okay, so you don't have to put it before every section. in that book.
Because this one
Because it's
exemption
already there.
already covers under the building code.
But there are, in other sections, there is a specific exception that says unless lawfully built, okay? I mean, there's, whether you're talking about plumbing, I think, there is an exception on plumbing, there's a specific exception. So you do mention it in several aspects, like ventilation, you know, except those that are installed lawfully. So it's not throughout. So if you've got it in some of these, and you've got this overall, why do you put it in some and not the others, in terms of the property management code?
Right,
Okay?
and it's the wording of the property maintenance code when we brought this in, that's their wording, this is their, we're adopting their best practices.
This was, it's sort of a related point about, because of this, I guess this 104.3, getting back to kind of right of entry issues. This is not something new that's being proposed, so I guess it's already adopted, but like Errol was saying before, once one thing is kind of proposed, everything's kind of up for grabs, right? And so I'm kind of reviewing some of the language in here, and some of my communication about the interaction between a code official and a property owner comes around the reasonable cause language. Like, I guess my experience is usually that there's reasonable suspicion and then there's probable cause, and reasonable cause falls into this weird area where I don't really know what it means. And I appreciate that a lot of things are gonna be up to the department's discretion in lots of different things, right, code enforcement included. But at least under that provision, it's unclear to me what reasonable cause actually means. And then it says, reasonable cause to believe that there exists in a structure or upon a premises a condition in violation of the property maintenance code. So that seems to, it implies that almost any violation that a police officer could see would give them reasonable cause to enter the property. And I think that that's some of the residents' concerns. So again, I appreciate that it's gonna come down to, like, is this something that we're really prioritizing? But at the end of the day, for the resident, their experience is sometimes that maybe things that they wouldn't think would be high priority are being cited.
Yeah.
I guess, and let me, from my perspective, and give you a cultural perspective also, right? Obviously, maybe, there have not been that amicable position between law enforcement and the black community, period, all right? So let's put the cards on the table. Then I get another uniform individual coming out here that will call you guys over to me on broken window or whatever the issue may be that may give probable cause for someone. And so what we see is more perception, more fact to us that, okay, here they are coming down on the community, all right? So look at it from that perspective, because they didn't like you guys out there, so you know they don't like you guys out there, all right? So from that particular perspective, and I'm just gonna put it where the goats can get it, all right? Down low so everybody know what we're talking about, all right? So I understand that the property codes are there and they need to be there, but how, and hey, you seem like a nice individual and basically cordial and what have you, but tell me, are you gonna culturalize those 18 other individuals in the field that have some sensitivity when they come dealing with these particular projects? That's basically what it all gonna boil down to, because like you said, you're laying open the books, and now we're gonna enforce all of this stuff that should have been enforced a long time ago, but now it appears that, and I hate to use this colloquialism, but now you're gonna bum rush, quote unquote, you guys know what I'm talking about, the neighborhood with enforcing all of this stuff that's here in the neighborhood. And hey, it's gonna give anybody pause, especially in light of what's going on in my neighborhood, from the bridge to everything else. Now it appears, quote unquote, happen to be coincident. It appears that now they're getting a new bridge, and now they're gonna try to make these houses come up to code. If they haven't been up to code, then we're gonna condemn them so we can get these people out of here. That's what you're fighting, all right? That's the issues that you guys are fighting, all right? So I'm just gonna put it where the goats can get it.
And, Mr.
All right.
Taylor, I knew that before coming to this meeting,
Okay.
that that's what we're fighting. I know, because I've been a police officer, and I'm west side, north side for 26 years. I still talk to a lot of people, and I know that the underlying concern is that the city of Corpus Christi wants to run the residents out of the north side. And I can tell you that that's not my intent.
Your objective.
It's to create a code that's unified across the city. It's not to run anybody out of any particular area of the city. That, and, you know, and I don't think, and I think we'll all agree that when Chief Simpson was here, that's not something he would have done, you know, and he supported this, and y'all that were at council, he stood up next to me and supported this and said,
Right.
so, you know, this is not something it's not a tool we're using to try to displace anybody anywhere in the city. As far as when a code officer can go in there, and I guess I should have said this earlier, just so it's clear. The police department oversees code enforcement. Police officers aren't code enforcement officers. There's times when the police officers may assist code enforcement depending on what the situation is, but they do not do code enforcement work. So, you know, there's probable cause on the criminal side. There's reasonable suspicion on the criminal side when we do police work. You know, as far as your code violations, what you're talking about, at no time, if a code officer sees a violation and they go knock on the door and they believe in their conversation that there is something more serious going on, to use the sewage or use the electrical stuff as an example, then, you know, obviously doing their job, they're gonna ask if they can come in to either confirm or eliminate these concerns. But in the end, the resident still has the right to say no. There is no time where a code officer, because of any violation, can enter somebody's house. At that point, that's why I made a point to talk about the administrative warrants for, is if it's serious enough, then that officer is gonna have to go through the judicial process of obtaining a warrant, just like a police officer would if they wanna come into somebody's house. There is no difference.
On the issue of, I think it's section 404.5, how many people can live in a house, dwelling unit? Okay, I know we all deal with issues going on in our personal lives, and people seek out help from all type of organizations. I noticed that there are a lot of these halfway houses
Right.
that pop up under all types of leadership, but it seems like there's one in particular. It's something isn't right there. If code enforcement is coming through neighborhoods and they see something when it comes to how many people are in a house, and there's all kind of cars, construction going on, and God forbid, just these weird people in and out of these houses. What do y'all do what can the residents do? Because there's two of them, and it's just always different people in and out of the community, in and out. Then some of them, I guess, get back on their drugs or whatever. They stay in vacant houses, you know. And how can you help Hillcrest get this under control? Is there a step? How many times can people call in and maybe you come out and talk to them, give them a written warning, put them on a 90-day period to get their act together? How would that work to try to clean up a lot of these transit in and out of our community?
Right, and that's a good question, and I think that kind of plays on coming up with a clear and concise code that allows us to do just that. It's some of these codes that were ambiguous, as I said, at best. It clarifies them, so all these things that, whether they're vacant houses or whether they're the too many people residing in a residence at one time, and I think is it 5 not related?
5 unrelated.
Unrelated, so those are things, and that's under
Zoning code.
zoning code, that that we're working, that we're bringing in here, is that, we need to, we need to investigate them, and under that particular code, because I looked at it this week, because we've had just as such thing, is that they have to have actually a lease agreement to live there. So if we have people that are residing in a house, over 5 people that are not related, then the landlord or whoever's renting that house should have a lease from each one of them. So these are the things that we can say, okay, now we can bring these people in and say, okay, you have over 5 people living here, where are your lease agreements? So there's things like that we can help the residents, and the vacant buildings, obviously is another one, the residents, and that they either need to be brought up a code, and I know removing them is always a sore subject anywhere in town when we have to take down buildings, but when they become to a point where they're substandard and they're blighted condition, it creates a hardship for the residents, then we're gonna have to take action one way or another, so.
And one more thing, how does the Parks and Recreation tie into code enforcement of our park? I know there's several parks, but we just had a big rain thing. I understand that weeds and grass grow up, but not you guys. Well, yes, you guys expect for us to keep our outside looking decent, and when there's times, the park and Hillcrest, weeds get this high. This high, and it just goes and goes, and then when they come and take all that stuff down, we gotta deal with the mosquitoes, we gotta deal with just weeds everywhere, so.
Because they don't clean it up.
They just come and cut it, paper blowing around. I mean, I'm not here blaming, pointing, it's also self-responsibility, but there's only so much we can do to that park. Another issue.
And I'm not, and you're right, I'm not gonna make excuses for the Parks Department not maintaining the park. I mean, I've made probably 2 or 3 different times, and most of the time it was before Easter, where I got them to come out to mow that park, because I know that the folks, the residents are gonna be out there. And I'm physically on the phone, making phone calls to get the Parks Department to come out. So I'm not gonna make excuses for why other divisions aren't doing their job, but I will say that in the city, we need to do a better job, and that's what we're hoping to do.
And I have one, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Right in front of my family's home, right by the curb, a tree has grown. And it is pulling down, I've called ADP? ADP. I've called the cable people, I've called the phone company. Here we are again approaching hurricane season. The limbs are pulling the wiring, and it's gonna collapse. I go down to City Hall, one lady had the nerve to say, go to Catholic Charity, maybe they'll do it for you. I'm not getting any results, because if that tree falls, it's gonna pull that down.
So what's the address on that?
It's 1305 Peabody.
Okay. And that may fall under traffic engineering or somebody, that depending on where it is, and that we may be able to get it trimmed, but we'll look at it.
Okay, thank you.
And not to get too far off topic, but.
Oh, okay, I thought that was
No.
still codes. Okay.
Well, it is codes, but we're just kind of talking about this
Okay,
one, but no,
all right.
and those issues, I mean, once we get done with this meeting, if there are addresses that we need to look at, then by all means, I want to hear about them.
Okay.
I got a question. What's the zoning for a halfway house versus a residence?
Big difference.
Huh? I
So-
mean, how is it that you have a halfway house, or whatever you wanna call it, versus a
Sure.
house next door?
To keep the meeting on track as far as the discussing the property maintenance code, can Gene meet with you after the meeting to
I-
discuss that difference?
I can-
We're trying to stay up with discussing just the proposed code, but we can meet with you after the meeting.
Okay, well, that's why I thought it was code.
The zoning rules can be found in the Unified Development Code, and that's held by, we've got a lot of codes.
Again, I understand, and I understand exactly what you're saying. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, Captain Blackman, you brought up this example of maybe a landlord who's renting to multiple tenants, and you got 5, and you need to have leases for everybody. When a code official is going out to provide them with a citation for something, a violation of the code, the city now, under the new code and maybe under the old ordinances too, was contracting with a separate organization to find the owner, or they have the ability to contract with a separate organization to actually find the owner of the property if they're not living locally. Does the police department, do you guys have like records of what are owner-occupied homes and what are not owner-occupied homes in Hillcrest? Are those records like available prior to the citation going out?
Yeah, for instance, and that's, I was on the planning commission for 8 years, okay? So what you do is give out notice, right?
Yes.
X number of feet around. Did that individual get notice that lives next door to her or her house? Because there's 5 individuals or more living right next door to her mother and what have you. So that's, when you're saying code enforcement, we understand, but okay, we don't know whether or not you did anything to those individuals or not. You know, all we see is the bad stuff. We don't know the good stuff you do. All right? So, and I understand what you're saying, this is zoning, isn't this, but how do you, in zoning, we notify. Do you notify with code that this has happened? What we see is a stick, somebody go cut the yard, all right? That's the notice that we know that something is happening at that particular residence. Is there any place to do, as you said, you're opening this up to everything. So everything is in play now, all right? How do you communicate with your neighbors, all right? Just simple stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I guess that goes back to, are they going through the process? Because there are some people, in fact, now that exist who have been cited and haven't gone through the process, haven't gone through the hearing process. So, I mean, what we're afraid of is that some of these rules are gonna eliminate that process. There was one, for instance, who got a citation for grass. Okay, you got 7 days to fix it. You know what I mean? Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not every single instance, but I thought the process was you get a letter telling you, hey, you're in violation. You have this time to get it done or whatever. Mr. Youngblood has numerous times said that they cited him because he had a Coke machine outside of his house or whatever, and he wasn't allowed a chance to fix it. He wasn't told to do it before he was, you know what, and that's falls on the individual officer. I understand that because I have an officer, the code officer in our neighborhood is going door to door. Okay, I mean, is that normal? I mean, I just, when I see him, I'm like, oh my God, there he goes again. You know as well as everybody in this room that it's been raining. So there's no way in the world any normal person would cut his grass when the grass is wet, because it damages your machine and the grass is, it doesn't make sense to cut your grass. You're gonna cut it and 2 days later it's gonna be right back where it was. And it seems like every time it rains, he's over there and he's passing out warnings and you know what I mean? It doesn't, how is he, I don't understand why he's in just that neighborhood and just those houses and, you know what I mean? This is what I'm saying, and I said it before the council and I've said, because you start off with good intentions, but the people that you have doing it are not doing, they're not gonna follow the same rules that you're doing.
Right.
They're gonna take it upon themselves to take it a little bit more, and that's what we're afraid of. Because I believe what Arrow is saying, that, what's to say he don't say there's a broken screen. And then, in the top of the broken screen, there's, the fence needs to be mended. And then on top of that, the numbers aren't seen. So now you have a compilation of problems. So now you're gonna get a warrant because you wanna go inside and see. That's what we're afraid of.
Well, you won't get a warrant, because there's not enough to get a warrant, because everything, you haven't articulated anything that would show that you need to go inside that house. Now, if that code officer is seeing where the fence is damaged and there's a screen issue or whatever the case, the examples are, if there are 3 different visible issues that need to be resolved, then there's 3 issues that need to be resolved. I mean, that doesn't eliminate the fact that what the officer sees, he has a job to do. Just, it's like the grass. I mean, I agree with you that it's been raining and that we need to give residents a reasonable amount of time to mow their grass after it dries up, just like we would expect the citizens of Corpus Christi to give us a reasonable amount of time to get our parks mowed. And if that's not something we're doing, then it is something we should be doing, because that was the directions that we were given, and I think we are doing that. So,
And none of these codes, and you know, I think what the problem is that when you gave us this book, you know, you didn't give us, you know, what you were changing, in other words, what it was before. You know, so basically you got us all riled up about something that, and you could have eliminated all this in the beginning.
and I understand, and I can appreciate that,
Because
but
you
let
gave us a
me,
book of all the things you're changing, and guess what? What are we having to compare to?
Yeah.
You know, that was unfair on your part.
well, it's not
And
so
then-
much, sir, that it's unfair, that is that, and it's funny you bring it up, because the 1973 version that we're trying to replace is non-existent. It's a dinosaur. There are not extra copies to give out. We literally have a book that we have in code enforcement, the Holy Grail, that
Well,
we
sir,
make copies of.
Is this the whole
to
book?
keep- What's that?
Is this the whole book you're trying to address?
Is this the whole property maintenance code in here? Yes, yes. And like I said, it's very few new ordinances, and I apologize for not giving you all the old one to compare, but there is nowhere you can find it. It's extinct.
I found it on like the 5th or 6th page of like a Google search, but you really have to
Yeah,
look for it.
And
And in your packet, we did give you some examples of where there's some comparisons between that old code and the new code, so you can kind of see where there's similarities and a few differences in there. So there is about 3 or 4 sheets there that does cover some of the high points, I guess, of the old code in comparison to the new code.
Well, in your explanatory pages, you know, you went, I mean, they're totally, I mean, they're just worthless. Because, you know, the way they're worded, you know, there is no explanation, there is no reference, simply, you know, because we didn't know whether to go through every single one of them or just ignore them, because we don't know if they're there as a
right.
reference to the old code, reference to the new code. It there's nothing, you know, doesn't.
Well, and in the end, I mean, I think open dialogue is a great thing. I mean, that's how people get things accomplished. I don't see that us having to have these meetings is a negative thing. I think it brings the community actually closer.
Yeah.
You know, so I I welcome these meetings, so, but going back to the code, I mean, it's, when we have an extinct out, you know, no longer in published, code, it's an embarrassment for the city. I mean, how did we allow something to go for so long? I mean, you think about 1973, I mean, that is embarrassing,
I got married.
you know?
More embarrassing, we don't have police over here. That's more embarrassing. You know, we've talked this issue over and over, and some of these code enforcement issues, like you said, you know, certainly if there was they wouldn't get to that extent. Not to the extent where we're having to tear buildings down. That's detriment to our neighborhood. So, you know what I mean? That's not something that you know, that should have happened or should be happening. It exists now. You know as well as I do. There is no police over here. One police officer assigned to our area. And I say that because I want you all to understand there's a lot of frustration because there's so many things that happen over here that shouldn't. You know, how did that house get to that point where it's torn down? You know, I don't believe that. I believe they should have gone before a board of standards, and I don't know whether they did or not, but I don't believe so, because we've asked many a times to be informed so that, you know, perhaps we could get it through another source. Maybe if you're gonna tear it down, that owner really doesn't care about it, you know, why can't we have it, or have somebody rebuild it? Or offer it to a contractor to rebuild for whatever, for affordable housing or whatever, you know what I mean?
And I think those are all, the police or these buildings are all great conversations, and they need, then, I mean, you know, I know when I was over here as a DPO and Mr. Williams, we would have monthly meetings, and we'd have it over in the north side over there. And maybe that's something that if it's not happening through the patrol division, and we can do that. And so that's something I mean, I welcome for us to start doing that again. You know, and it's, if these buildings don't go before the building standards board, it's because the owner said, I'm not gonna do anything with it, and I want you to tear it down. So at that point, we're gonna have to have some avenue to rebuild this thing, because it can't sit there, exist for these drug addicts and everybody else to create havoc for the neighborhood. So there has to be a resolution. If it's not tearing it down, then the resolution is gonna be to rehabilitate it.
Put more police, put more police.
But that's a Band-Aid.
I mean-
What is the ultimate goal is you're gonna have to rehabilitate that. that structure, so how do we get there? It's gonna be a strong organization, and whether it's Citco or somebody else is gonna help do this. So that's where I think we're gonna, having these monthly meetings and stuff, maybe we can progress. But as far as putting more police driving around a vacant house to make sure the drug dealers don't congregate there, that's not an answer, it's a Band-Aid. And historically, you know, you can look at the Kansas City experiment and a couple of other ones, that police officers driving around do not reduce crime. You know, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you have to get out and start talking to people and be painfully honest. It's no secret that there's not enough police officers in this city, anywhere, you know. And we're hoping to get there, but it's gonna take a few years to get there. So, you know, more police to drive around to hope to keep people off of problem properties is not gonna be the answer. The answer is gonna be to have a strong organization, just like the steps you're taking now, to demand that, hey, we don't want our vacant buildings tore down, so now what are we gonna do about it? And whether that's Citco or Flint Hills or whoever that wants to step up as a community partner, whether they're the churches, the faith-based groups are great, you know, they look for summer projects. So what are we gonna do if we can get these properties donated? Can we rehabilitate them so we can put people in them? But those are things that we're gonna have to do aside from code enforcement and police. That's where we as a community comes in. So,
May
yes, sir.
I ask, I want to get to some specific
Okay.
provisions of the code that I think have caused me concern and as well as others in the room. And I think Peter has some as well, some real specific questions about something. First of all, I think City of Baltimore may have been the group that did this, but under the provisions relating to the authority, the code official, okay, under that section, they included, and I think it's great because it kind of it addresses some of the overall concerns that we have, that there should be a general statement or requirement that the code official and the department is prohibited from the arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement of the code that would violate substantive and procedural due process under the 14th Amendment. I believe that statement should be clear under the code official's authority, that everything emanates from that. You know, that we're talking about procedural due process and don't break it, okay? There's a couple of, we're concerned about the violations and the misdemeanors, and I think Peter might be addressing that, but I want to go ahead and bring it up because section 106.3, in the very beginning it says, any person in conflict with or in violation of the code, or person failing to comply with a notice of violation or order, etc., can be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, okay? I'm wondering who is covered by that first phrase, because it on the one hand, you've got a person failing to comply with a notice of violation or order that might be deemed guilty, but then it starts off with any person in conflict with or in violation of the code shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor. And so
Sounds like you could only be in violation of the code if you've received that notice of violation and not complied. So I don't know what that first.
yeah, the first phrase is confusing. It sounds like any person in conflict with or in violation of the code, regardless of whether or not they've gotten notice, shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor. And so that causes us some concern because we really don't even understand who any person in conflict with. That would be anyone who has let the weeds grow, right? I mean, or maybe the attorney can address that. Do you see the
I understand what you're
conflict?
saying. And I think that is a correct assessment. There's some violations where, like the grass is a bad example because it's in a different place in the ordinance. I'm trying to see if I find a good example.
Right, so are there other violations for which you wouldn't need to get the 30-day notice of violation? Or,
It could be, if, the health and safety code issue stuff, if you have stuff like raw sewage, then that can be one, where you don't necessarily have to give 30 days, because it is a health and safety issue.
But you still have to give some notice of violation, right? You still have to give them notice of violation. What we're trying to figure out is who is covered by this general clause, any person in conflict with or in violation of the code. Those people, we don't know who those people are, except everybody who is in violation, everybody who's in conflict with, and it has nothing to do with whether or not they've been actually noticed, because it says, or a person. So I'm thinking, and maybe the city attorney can take a look at that phrase and see, get some clarity on who that is.
Yeah, I guess, where the ghost can get it again. You tell me this, and using that health and safety violation, okay, using health and safety where you don't have to be 30 days, okay. Following that logic, y'all tell me, because I could be wrong. Let's say I do have someone do have sewage breakage or something that needs to be taken care of at that particular time. So that individual is guilty, right? So it says that, and there could be a misdemeanor on that person's part, right?
Right.
Ooh. So in essence, I get charged with a misdemeanor because I have a broken sewage pipe.
Well,
No,
okay.
but according to that, that could happen, right?
And I think I kind of misspoke, because, yes, any person who is in violation of the code can be charged with a misdemeanor. However, per the code official is also required to provide notice of the violation per 106.2. So.
But like I said, the 30 days, I said health safety. I said health and safety where, hey, we need to shut this down 24 hours or 7 hours or whatever when I see raw sewage coming in, because that is a,
Right.
okay, so that is a gentleman's use of health and safety, right? So how, right then, utilizing that logic, then, hey, I'm guilty of a misdemeanor because I have a broken pipe, all right? Am I right? I just want to make sure.
And being guilty of a misdemeanor and
Yeah.
being accountable.
Okay.
And there's some things that we're not gonna serve 30-day notice on.
I know,
If you
I know,
have raw
yeah.
sewage, then.
Shut
then
it down, please.
And
But
that's the
don't
point.
give me a misdemeanor because of my pipe.
Well,
Okay.
but I mean, technically it is a misdemeanor. It's a state statute, and that's using that one as an example where I say, hey, you have this class C, this misdemeanor for this health and safety code issue, raw sewage that's pumping out onto our storm sewage into our neighbor's yard, and you need to take care of it now.
Now, exactly.
If you don't
Call
take
a
care of it
plumber out
now,
there and get it
then-
taken
then-
care of.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
call a
that's-
plumber out there and get it taken care of.
So that doesn't mean
ASAP.
we're gonna start issuing you citations.
Thank
It
you.
just means that you're
Accountable
accountable
for
at
it, is
that point.
So in essence, if I let it dwindle at say 8 hours, then yeah, give me
Or
whatever.
3 days. I mean, could y'all imagine if we didn't
I
have
don't,
that?
I
where
don't want
can't-
it, all right? I can imagine, I don't want it, all right? I don't wanna smell it. I don't,
Yeah.
there's no, my
So
neighbors.
there are things that are not gonna require 30-day notices.
I
And that's a good one.
understand. That's what I
4-foot
said.
high grass could be another one, depending on what the animals are in there.
My deal is the misdemeanor.
The city attorney's office can certainly look at that provision. I know what the intent is here, the intent is the people that you can't get noticed, like the vacant property owner where you send out he lives in New Hampshire, you mail him a letter, no response, doesn't sign the certified card, so you can't get a hold of the owner. It's kind of that kind of situation, but go ahead.
related to those issues, you might also want to take a look at, I don't know if I'm just misreading this, but when we go to the notices and orders section after, so 106.2 refers to 107, and then 107 refers us back to city code section 13-20. And then I think that has maybe been changed, like the notice provisions. It seems like 13-20 has a new subsection with the. So the notice section might be a different 13 dash something else. I'm not really sure.
It's sequential.
So it just includes everything.
It's chapter 13.
Gotcha.
Basically, and the notice provision in chapter 13 is 1326.
Do you guys, so the issue about the person responsible, like, this is what I was trying to get to earlier, is you guys know who what properties are owned by people
Title
residing
searches,
there?
we were able to, title searches, utility bills,
Appraisal district.
And those
appraisal
things,
district.
that happens
We're-
before the citation goes out?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're able to do that.
Yeah.
So it's not the person who gets the because if like a tenant gets a notice, or a tenant wouldn't get the notice, but if an accident tenant gets a notice, it's not their obligation to prove
Right.
that they don't actually own the property.
Yeah, it's the owner.
The owner of the property. Now, we may notify a tenant just out of courtesy to say, hey, this needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
And it's more of a heads up as a courtesy. Like I said, ultimately, the owner is held responsible
Right.
for the condition of the property.
We also have a form of affidavit of non-ownership where we make a mistake and we identify the wrong owner, then if that person's like, hey, I'm not the owner, they can fill out an affidavit saying I'm not the owner and possibly lead us to.
When is that provided to them?
When the notice is sent,
When the notice goes out.
it accompanies the notice, and that's the reason, is it, sometimes the appraisal district is behind on updating their records, and so a property, we may have, John Q owns this property, and we send the notice, and in the 7 days, or that notice is traveling through the mail, or however long it is, maybe he sold the property,
Right.
okay? And so that, and then he lets us know, I no longer own this property, it is now owned by such and such person. And so we take that information back, and now we notify the correct owner, and we also send the information to the appraisal district so that we help update their records.
Okay.
I just want to say, for the attorney, working at the appraisal district, that's what I do right now, part-time, don't beat me. You may want to look at, well, some of these properties that they own, its owners are unknown, but they live in the house, but they don't give name or address or how you contact them, it's just that house, all right? So you may want, because you can't serve an unknown, all right? So you may want to start looking at how you can be able to adequately serve those individuals, but that's an aside for you to work out when you're going to.
Yeah, and if we have to do title searches and
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
stuff for those, then we do.
Title searches, and if they use city utilities, utility records, so we have our methods.
Okay.
And if nothing else, knock and ask.
Who's the owner, yeah.
Can I, Lamont raised the issue about the misdemeanor, okay, and it's a concern for all of us, okay? This misdemeanor offense should be eliminated, okay? Misdemeanors in the 70s or with the old code, had as a much less impact than a misdemeanor today, okay? And we're talking about how it affects credit reports, how it affects, getting loans, how it affects, your credit rating, background checks, a misdemeanor for a broken pipe or a misdemeanor for, which there is a case that, I won't mention names, but let's say we've got a water heater that is messed up and the violation is cited. They can't get it fixed in time. It goes to court, and now they've got a misdemeanor because of a water heater that's not in code. And that individual now has a criminal background with a misdemeanor, even though it's not like they went out and, committed criminal mischief. It's because of a broken water heater or a broken electrical. The point being this, the misdemeanors today carry a much heavier punishment on an individual. And that may be what you're trying to do as a deterrent, but to put a misdemeanor on someone's record, I don't even know if it can be expunged because it's a strict liability issue, okay? So that if ultimately, it could get expunged, I don't know whether it can or not. But the problem is, it will have a disparate impact on low income and persons of color. Because we have the EEOC, the Department of Labor, everyone has said that, that low-income individuals and persons of color have a harder time with credit reports and all those things because of a simple misdemeanor that's on their record, okay? And so it in and of itself has a disparate impact on persons of color. And so I'm wondering from the city attorney's perspective, you know, I don't know that code enforcement even needs to, you could give us your opinion on whether or not you think it should be a misdemeanor, but hit them in the pocketbook. And if you could maybe even put a provision in here that says, if you have 3 or more violations in a certain period of time, then you could be guilty of a misdemeanor. But make it something onerous and not just someone that happens to have violated a fence issue or a screen issue because you had a gung-ho enforcer, okay? And now they possibly could face a misdemeanor that will be on their record for a long time.
Well, and I don't want to downplay a misdemeanor because it is a criminal violation, but I really don't believe an ordinance misdemeanor violation would show up on, say, a state criminal background check. It's only going to come up on a local background check. But I guess the real problem is.
A local?
That's why I live local.
Yeah.
That's why I live.
No, I understand.
Hey, yo.
But it's no different. It's a Class C misdemeanor. It's no different than getting a speeding ticket. You know, if I have a speeding ticket on record, people don't think that I'm evil, or I hope they don't think I'm evil.
But your insurance go up.
Or wrong.
But questions on criminal background checks are not, have you got anything above a speeding ticket? You
Well,
know?
and I guess what I'm trying to say is the dilemma that the city is with is that the state grants the city limited powers on how to enforce things. And unfortunately, Class C misdemeanors is one of the only few remedies we have to seek compliance for these type of violations.
When is because it seems like the other option then is to go to this building standards board.
That's more extreme cases, you know, not just a broken pipe, but the house is dilapidated and it's a safety hazard.
Okay.
So that's on the extreme spectrum where we gain civil authority.
But it seems like you have the authority to do that in all cases, right? It's because you may proceed to the municipal court, or alternatively, or additionally, code shall present the complaint to the building standards board. And so is it just that it goes to the building standards board when it's a more serious case that involves like big structural problems?
Right, where it needs like a serious repair or something more.
It seems like that's the only place where a person could talk about any kind of like the underlying causes of a problem, right? Because once you get into municipal court, it's a strict liability offense, so you can't say like, oh, I just didn't know that I needed to have a new water heater enclosure or something like that. Do you know what I mean? So it seems like maybe the building standards board, that process, I understand it's being used for bigger violations now, but it seems like it might be useful for people who are getting these smaller.
I think that our notice language can be improved to ensure that, you know, if you're gonna be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, that you at least have had a notice, unless you're maybe some sort of exception for the absentee owner. I mean, we can evaluate that.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying.
With the notice too, so because the person who's receiving the citation has the right to go to the building standards board themselves, right? So like the code official can file something with the building standards board, but also the person who receives the citation has the right to go before the building standards board and plead their
No,
case.
for a case to go before the building standards board, the code official brings the complaint to the board saying this property is non-compliant. We need the board to take action against them.
Where's the due
So-
process for that individual?
I have a specific, I think, maybe you can tell me, clarify something that I might be
But
misreading.
they don't have the right to, well, it depends on what we're talking, if that's for a citation.
Right.
Not for a criminal citation.
I guess so I don't wanna get too much in the weeds here, but if we look at 13-26, subsection E. The provisions of section B, which is action upon failure to comply with the notice, do not preclude a person who has received the notice under subsection A from requesting and receiving a hearing before the board under subsection C. So I could just be misreading it, but I thought that that meant that the person who gets the notice of violation can also petition the board.
No, this notice of violation they're talking about is a notice, for the building standards board. It's not a
That notice
citation.
is received.
So there's two different
Different.
kinds
It's
of.
not-
There's structural issue, the building standards issues, which, that this is talking about, and then there's your other general citation issues for ordinances and all those things are there. That it goes back to the water heater. We're not issuing citations for water heaters. There is always due process, and that due process is the notice of, hey, you know, you have this issue that you need to correct. It's such a time where they don't correct the issue, then they may progress to a citation, whether it's after 7 days, whether it's after 30 days, or in some instances, if it's a major issue like sewer, where and we've had apartment complexes where we say, hey, you have sewer on the ground, you need to fix it, and they say, okay, we'll have it fixed tomorrow. Okay, and we'll come back. If it's fixed, then no harm, no foul. But if it's not, then we may issue a citation. So, but the rest of it, there is due process. There's 7-day notices, there's your 30-day notices.
And depending on the violation.
And-
Well, a lot of it is determined by state law, as how long the compliance period would be. For health and safety violations, it's 7 days. And so that's the reason that you see the placard, you see the sign in the yard, is that, you know, that's one form of notification that the violation needs to be corrected. It's an official notice. We also send a notice giving the time to correct that violation. A issue with the living conditions would get a 30-day notice, or an issue with the structural components of the house would get a 30-day notice. It's gonna be dependent on the severity of the violation, on how much time is allowed.
And it's
to
outlined
correct it.
already in
Yeah,
the-
and it's already outlined in the existing ordinances, and
So the building, there's a separate building standards
Yes.
code
Yes.
that's not
Yes.
included in these, for
Correct.
which if you receive a citation under that, a violation of that code, you can petition the building standards board.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So
It's
I'm just wondering, when do people who get a violation, a notice of violation for a violation of the property maintenance code, when do they get to argue about the underlying reasons for the violation? Because they can't do it in municipal court, so when do they get to kind of just explain what's going on?
If it's a criminal citation, they do it in municipal court. They have the right to plead not guilty or request for withdrawal.
But it's a strict
Okay, but
liability.
typically, for a violation under this code, we are gonna send a notification. We're gonna send a notice in the mail to open that line of communication, open that dialogue. Let me know what's going on.
Yeah.
Tell me why, what the reason is, why it's that way. And then let's work out a time frame, okay, that's reasonable for everybody. Yeah, the law says you're gonna get such and such amount of time, okay? But you're gonna tell me that perhaps you have a financial hardship. Maybe you're living, on a social security check. I gotta wait till that check comes in before I can make these repairs. I'm a reasonable person. I'm gonna give you that time to do that. We've established that and we've agreed upon that you're gonna do that. We're gonna work on that. So that's that dialogue. That's the time when you have to let me know what the
It's
circumstances are.
within the notice period and the
It's-
filing.
Yes, yes.
Or outside of it. I mean, if it's 30 days has gone by and you're saying, hey, I'm still waiting on the contractor to come out and do this, then there's not an issue with extending. It's just that there has to be dialogue
There
on
has
both
to be
ends.
that dialogue.
And as far as the misdemeanor part of it, sir, and I can appreciate the potential hardships but at some point, there's gonna have to be a mechanism for accountability, or folks, we're gonna be sitting here in a year going, okay, and you're gonna be saying, how come we can't hold that person accountable for,
Well, multiple violations, I mean, if you were to say, multiple violations 3 times or whatever in a certain period of time, then you would be guilty of a misdemeanor. I mean, it doesn't have
we're watering
to
it down
be-
so far that it is ineffective.
Pardon me?
We're gonna water it down so far that the code is ineffective, and we're here to work with the residents.
Well, I don't know, $500 a pop is pretty good, and we're not talking about a situation where we've got a multiple offender or a repeat offender. We're talking about the individual who runs into some hardships, and you say that you would work with them and stuff, but in fact, it has not. In some cases, they have not worked, or it has fallen through the cracks, and now that individual has a misdemeanor on their record, okay? And it was for a single violation, okay? And that's just wrong, and it was for a minor thing, okay? And so if you want the hammer of a misdemeanor, it would seem to me that make the hammer applicable upon those individuals who are repeat violators, you know? I mean, it's just
I don't think
because
there's a city,
a single.
I don't know that there's a city in the state of Texas that does not use the misdemeanor.
But Corpus Christi can be different.
Right.
Okay? Corpus
just-
Christi can raise the
I think-
standards.
Right, but
you
I think
know?
it's,
I mean, some cities have not adopted, like I said, the fence rule, or the in-screen rule,
No,
you know? I mean, there are things, and the specific provision that I provided a moment ago about constitutional rights, that's not part of the IPMC, you know? That was put in by a city to ensure the protection of the citizens. So there's nothing to bring. One city, I'm thinking, okay, that it's in New York, but I'm not, I was doing a lot of research on who adopted these codes and who took them verbatim as a boilerplate, and then who tweaked it, you know? And one city said that the violation must go to a board, a civil board, before it ever goes to the criminal aspect, okay? So you get the opportunity. He was raising the issue about notice to go to the Building Standards Board. Actually, it would be our recommendation that be the first step, to give the individual the opportunity to argue,
Have a
you
right to
know,
hearing.
or,
Right to a hearing.
pardon me?
All right, you're.
Yeah, and you know, they get, what is it? They're composed of 7 people, a lawyer, an architect, but some cities have adopted that approach, okay? So just because Corpus, or everybody in the state of Texas has misdemeanor as a part of this code, that doesn't mean that we can't step up.
And can I just for a point of clarity, I don't wanna, all misdemeanors issued by any department in the city of Corpus Christi, you always have a right to a hearing. You have the right to a criminal trial, to either bench or jury, and you can have a trial before your peers. So I don't wanna make it sound like this is eliminating your right to a jury trial. That is not the case. The strict liability provision, all that is saying is that the state doesn't have to prove your mens rea. We don't have to prove you intended to have a broken pipe, you just have to prove that you had a broken pipe. That's all
Right.
that does.
So I understand that maybe the department wants to have the dialogue with the resident to kind of get at the underlying circumstances, but you can understand the residents' maybe hesitancy to engage in the same kind of dialogue that they would with an impartial third party who would be judging the causes, the underlying circumstances of a potential violation than with the law enforcement agency, right? It just seems like a tough position to put residents in, to say that, you know, here's your notice of violation, we wanna help you out here. If you don't wanna help yourself out, then we're gonna file something in municipal court, and it's gonna be a Class C misdemeanor. I don't wanna bring any skepticism on the department that they actually want to engage in a genuine dialogue with the resident, but I can understand the resident's perspective where they think like, man, you know, it's somebody from the police department who's giving me this citation, I don't wanna explain what's going on to them, and like, maybe I'll just go to court. And, you know, what I've seen is, frankly, a lot of people go to court and they have no idea what's going on there, you know, and maybe they won't even go to their hearing, and then they'll get a letter from Linebarger, right? And then they'll enter a plea, and it's like, you know, I think once it's gotten to that point, we've kind of, it's beyond where they're willing to actually engage in the genuine dialogue.
I'm just
that the
wondering
department's looking for.
how ineffective would this, and backlog will a system be where there is no accountability for people who do not wanna maintain properties. and going back to your absentee landlords, where there is no hammer, for a better word, where, that we tell people, you have to maintain these properties that people are living in, and you know, I can only reemphasize that this is not about screens and water heaters, this is about bigger issues. And if we do not have the ability to issue somebody a notice, and they take that notice and throw it in the trash, and now we're saying, okay, now you have the opportunity to go talk to somebody, and there, it's just, we're not doing justice, and we're not, and to the citizens of this community that demand it. I mean, this is the city as a whole that we're looking, Mr. Williams?
No, David, I think my comment has more to do with, I think, the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And tonight we're dealing more with the letter of the law. You mentioned earlier the fact that at one time we were having regular monthly meetings. And the experience that I've had in dealing with code enforcement had to do with, you know, a lady who was elderly. Okay, and quite often, code enforcement violations have to do with either the poor or the elderly. That is, those who are not able to take care of their property. Or they may not have, you know, a son or a relative, you know, someone to cut the grass, or if a tree falls down, this sort of thing to move. And this particular lady had a violation. And she happened to contact me because of the neighborhood association. And I think the time period had expired for her addressing the notice that she had received. Ultimately, and she was living on Social Security income, okay? And we went up to code enforcement, okay, to address the problem. And what happened was that she was giving I think a $25 per month fine until the violation was paid off. My question is this: and can code enforcement work closely with the neighborhood?
I think we need to.
Yeah, that is, so that when you're dealing with someone who is either very poor or elderly, okay, and their continued violations, contact us first, okay?
And Mr. Williams, we have, I mean, and you know, we have groups also that, I mean, and so, but many times we need to know about it before.
Yes.
And I've, many a times, and if I know about it, even if we've issued a citation, I'm not above going back to municipal court and saying, hey, let's dismiss this ticket, there's another avenue we're gonna take. But these are the things as community partners that we have to do. So in this one, and I don't know if this was before we took over or after, but those are the issues that, and it's not about the police department, it's not about code enforcement, it's about us as a community as a whole, is that we have to know about these issues, and we have to, resolve them as a group. So it's, we're not here to play gotcha. I mean, and Tracy will attest, when I took over code enforcement, it's not about going and issue people citations that can't correct issues. If you have an elderly person or somebody that's indigent, and their grass is high, and you tell them to mow their grass, and they don't have the means to mow it, and you give them a citation, I promise you, you're gonna go back in 7 days, and that grass is still gonna be high, because they didn't have the ability to mow it then, they're not gonna have it now. So we have to find alternate motives to take care of it.
Actually, and one thing that you all could, in a way that we could work together, okay, would be that if someone from code enforcement contacted someone in the neighborhood association, okay, and let us, seek to assist that individual, before the problem develops. And then, could we do it that way?
It can work that way, but understand, initially, we've got to open up the line of communication somehow, okay? And we're dealing with thousands upon thousands of property violations. We deal with the property and the violation, okay? When I get a complaint that comes in to the office, and it says that this house on whatever street has high weeds or whatever the violation is, I'm going to look at that house, okay? I don't know the backstory, I don't know the history there, okay? And I realize that. There may be a whole lot more going on there than I am aware of on the surface. But I have to somehow initially open up that line of communication. And that may be sending the notice. If I'm not able to make contact with that individual at the property, which we do try. And again, as the captain said, you know, once the police department took over last year, we refocused. We kind of went back to what we did, you know, 12 years ago when I first started, was getting down, talking to people. Okay, we got away from that. I admit that. Okay, because our leadership pushed us in a different direction. But we are coming back to that. Understand, you know, like I said, we got to find resolution to these issues. And we want to help the elderly person or the person who's disabled that can't do it for themselves. But I don't know that initially. Okay, and so sometimes the only way to open that line of communication is to send that letter. And yeah, that letter it's a form letter, and it goes out, and some people get upset about it because of the way that it's written. They may feel that it's offensive, but it has to be strong in its language in order to get some kind of a reaction out of that person, whether it's that absentee landlord who doesn't do anything. He needs to know that he's going to be held accountable. And I understand it may scare the little old lady down the street because she gets this and she thinks she's going to go to jail for having high weeds. I understand she may be afraid of that. And at that point, I want to talk to her and let her know that's not the case. That's not the case. But I have to open up that line of communication. And when we do that, then we reach out to our neighborhood groups to see if we can get some help. That's where we want to be to get the resolution. Okay?
To follow up on Reverend Williams' notion here about notification to possibly the Residents Association, this is another action where the city could step up, you know? Is it beyond the realm of possibilities that an ombudsman position could be created with the city, either within the department or within another, somewhere within neighborhood services, and have that ombudsman be the one to not just go out the first time, but to follow up, you know, and help this individual work through the hardships that they may be experiencing, to put them in contact with resources, so that there would be, in essence, a victim advocate, like many, you know, departments have, and it would be an ombudsman. I think even the AAAs have, area agencies on aging have ombudsmen. And is that beyond the possibilities, or is that something that because that individual would be helping these individuals, even if they got a citation going to court, you know? I mean, you'd have someone with that individual saying, this is, you know, this is what you need to do, and I can help you. I know where the resources are. Instead of just, you know.
And those are some of the programs we are working with Senior Community Services and AmeriCorps. They have a group called the Vistas that come in and coordinate efforts like that. So that's one of the things that code enforcement is reaching out to other departments to try to establish some of those resources, like you said, because we're going to identify the violation. We realize we're the bad guy, and that's the way that's going to happen. But again, you know, if I can put you in touch with the right person who can help you find resolution, get this problem resolved, so that we don't have to keep coming back to this. So we're trying to do that. We are working on some avenues to
Because I
bring
think just
those
a
in.
single individual that everybody could go to, you know, that would be a really good
Sir,
good
and
step.
actually, in the last few years, we've actually have directed patrol officers that actually do a lot of that. They assist, they kind of coordinate services, look for other avenues to assist people that are in need. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yeah, and you know, you're talking about, is there gonna be a single advocate that the city is gonna have either on its payroll or a volunteer from, you know, being realistic, probably not.
Is that something, though, that if we asked the city to do, would code enforcement, would you support something like that? If we were to go to them and say, create this ombudsman?
I would support any effort where that there's somebody that could work through the community groups, faith-based groups, and other.
We did have one. It was Denise, I can't remember her last name. I think you guys call her the police whisperer. She was a real good person. She was really helpful. but she was taking them to different things, but we did have a director of patrol officer.
Yeah, and so, I guess my, Denise Page.
Page.
So I guess my point is if that's something y'all wanna bring before the council, any avenue that we can have where we can resolve things without having to go to a citation, I embrace fully. I'm not, like I said, when I first started this, this isn't about generating revenue, and it's not about playing gotcha, it's about creating a standard. And if that's something that y'all can get the city council or somebody to embrace, that's fine. And like I said, at this time, I mean, we have some groups that we try to reach out to. We have some, like the commander said, we have the director patrol officers that have all kinds of tentacles out in the community. And when we identify these areas, these elderly or indigent people, that we look for alternatives. There was a story at Christmas where this lady that lived over, in New Edition over off of Rogers over there, that she hadn't had running water in a month or two because the landlord didn't want to fix it. We found a plumber, we got a plumbing company to pay for the materials, and had it come out on Christmas Eve to redo this lady's plumbing so her kids could take a shower. There was no citation issued for that. That was, so it was, I mean, we always look for resources and alternatives. It's not about generating revenue. But the fact is, we have to be able to identify a problem, and we can't create ordinances that exempt somebody because of their age, their race, their, whatever other thing, because then we don't have a single standard. What we do is we create an ordinance that creates a standard, and then once we've identified the problem, then we look for solutions. And that's, as plain as I can say it, is there comes a point where we all have to jump in with both feet and say, hey, you know what, I trust you at your word, and I came here and, being as honest as I can, and there comes a point where you have to say, you know what, Captain, you seem like an ethical man, and I appreciate the direction you're going, or I don't, and, we're gonna support you, and if it comes to a point where that you do not think that we're doing what we need to do, then you need to tell us, hey, you're not doing what that you said you were gonna do. You're not gonna have that problem. I promise you that these ordinances, although anything is up for interpretation now because it is open, they are things that have been existent, and we're not running around paying gotcha. They're tools in a tool chest that if we need them to resolve a major issue, that they're there to help the citizens out. And that's it in a nutshell.
Quería ver si
me interpretaban en español.
Yeah, right, yeah. What I would like to do, he needs to interpret, what I told him that for your, Mr. Attorney. when he
Tengo
did-
una pregunta muy buena. O sea, donde están los puentes y todo, zacate de este tamaño. Y ya mero hora yo tenía un accidente por eso. O sea, si ustedes nos están enseñando a nosotros todo esto, entonces, ¿por qué no le ponemos una carta al city? Para que ellos estén corten el zacate y se vea mejor la ciudad. Porque, o sea, pues aquí abajo, todos los highways.
Sí,
en
he's
el
talking
highway,
about
claro.
the grass underneath the underpasses and stuff.
It's state.
Esa es la propiedad del
O sea,
Estado.
que quisiéramos que ustedes nos ayudaran para que se cortara el zacate.
Yeah, he'd like to get help on that, enforcing those.
Porque hay muchos mosquitos y todo, y eso también a las familias de nosotros también nos afecta. Entonces, si vamos a trabajar en todo, entonces quisiera que de una manera tal pusieran algo en eso.
Right, and he's asking that you try to get involved with whatever entities, whether it's a state or, and because that, of course, that's infestation of mosquitoes and whatever animals, because they don't take care of it either.
Yeah, and we've contacted the state, and with all the rain that they've gotten statewide, they're very, very backlogged. I mean, it's just like we're saying, hey, we need to give the residents time to mow the grass. I mean, the reality is, we're gonna have to give the state time. The grass, and I agree with you, it is very high, and it's hard to see in some areas when you're getting on the freeway. It's dangerous, but I mean, they're gonna have to catch up.
Por el mientras no le están exigiendo nada por el lado del agua que ha habido tanto, pero sí se van a atender de eso.
Okay. Gracias.
Okay. One other thing, and I noticed, when you send those notices out, do you send them in English and Spanish? That's basically when you do those notices about.
Most everything is in Spanish.
Okay, good deal. So I just wanna make sure, cause when I see them, I don't look on the back to see what.
And that's something we can do a better job of. Some of them are have been translated into Spanish, some of them have
Have
not.
not,
And
yeah.
so that's something that's a work in progress.
Right,
We know
okay.
that it needs to
It
happen.
happened, yeah.
And
So, yeah, cause I was thinking about him, I say, when they send those notices out, you know, yeah, they got a notice, but I don't know what it's saying, you know, so if you can do it on English and
Yeah.
Spanish, you know.
Outstanding. There was an issue on one of these that said, the lien attachment. In some instances, and I don't know what instances that's the question basically, because on some of your writing, you had, a question of lien attachment. And I believe that, you know, that was one of the issues that we wanted to talk about. Cause you made reference to, you know, putting a lien attachment, and some of the things that we've talked about, you know, you mentioned that you're limited to this or limited to that, but where and when does a lien attachment come, where does it come into effect?
So if we provide a service where we have to go onto a property and because somebody refuses to work with us, and I'll give an example, it's that, one of the multiple lots over here in Hillcrest that these people own, they don't wanna mow, and the grass is 4 foot high. If we have to hire a contractor to go and mow that grass, and he doesn't wanna pay the bill that we submit to him because it's, the city's having to incur the cost, then a lien will be placed on that property for that.
So it's directed to that issue?
It's directed to the lien's placed on the property and it's related back through a bill to the costs incurred to abate that particular issue.
So if they pay the bill, the lien is removed?
Or if they pay the bill, there is no lien.
There is no
Okay,
lien.
okay.
Yeah, the bill's paid.
And in that same, since we're on the lots and what have you, what is the procedure with that? Because they don't, I mean, it's not done often enough. I mean, there's some out there that's 6 foot tall. I mean, and it's more than a handful.
Yeah.
You know, every time they knock a house down, well, there goes an empty lot, there goes more, you know, if it got to the point of tearing the house down, then it's even worse now, because now you have rats, you have snakes, you know, so that's more than a, you know, health issue.
Oh, you're right.
So, you know what I mean, I don't understand if it's a repeat violator, what, you know, what,
Well, the problem is that, and if we've got one or two more, jump in, but we have 13 contractors that we use to mow all of these properties in the city that either are like the ones you're talking about, that people have just abandoned or just don't wanna maintain. We have $5,000 lots in Hillcrest that we have $20,000 liens on.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I mean,
ain't
we're not,
buying it.
the city's
You're
not
right.
gonna recover any money.
You're right, ain't
And then
buying it.
we spend $200,000 a year abating properties, if you can imagine, mowing grass.
Yeah.
You know,
I can
so,
imagine.
so the short answer to that is we're getting to them as fast as we can. And it's just, especially with this rain, it's just, you know,
Oh,
it's
it's that
like
much
the
more.
freeway. I mean, it's just
I'm
playing catch up.
I'm used to it, cause I have one on my left and one up here on my right, so, hey, what I'm interested in is when I cannot see around the corner.
Yeah.
All right? That's the stuff that
And if there's-
drives me, so in essence, if I have an accident, you know, hey, because the weeds are higher than me, all right, and I'm 6'2".
Yeah.
So,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm in my car, so therefore I can't see around the corner, so.
And if,
That's the stuff that irks me. I say, hey, they knock down the house, and yeah, okay, I understand they knock down the house, but then a constant, I told the chief, and I told the mayor, I waited 6 months. Waited 6 months, you know, till I had to bring to their attention that they cut one on my right and over on on the left. Yeah, you'll get it, you'll get to it, and I understand that. I really do understand that you're backlogged, I really do. But dang, 6 months,
you're right.
you know, that's,
and we're trying to do a better job. I will tell you that Mr. Taylor, we're not a mowing service. We get them to as quickly.
I understand,
But
I understand.
but that being said,
Sometimes I go and cut it, you know.
yeah,
they-
that being said, and I'm not offering you anything that I haven't offered anybody else in this city when I have this. If you have one that's a major health and safety issue, or it's a safety issue because you can't see, call code enforcement and say, hey, I've got this one. And if you're not getting any resolution, then call me or Tracy, and we will get somebody out there to mow it. We'll put it further. If they're a health and safety issue or they're a
Put it-
safety issue in
okay,
general,
right.
then we can.
Okay.
Who would you call in the event, like for instance, he was talking about the ones on the freeway, or the access where you can't see to get on or get off? Who do you call in that instance?
Text
Text that.
With regard to the lien
Liens.
attachments, you know, yes, you've got the multiple people who do not mow and things like that. But then you have the occasional individual who has just messed up, okay? And is there and you go out, let's say, whatever the abatement is, okay, whether it's weeds or what have you, city goes out and abates. Is there a notice provision to the owner? You know, you've gone out and you've mowed and you've acquired a bill, all right? Most liens cannot attach until some notice is given
They
to
would have
the
received a
individual.
notice prior to abatement.
They
would have.
they give the notice prior to abatement?
They would have received a notice for the violation, and they have a compliance period. On high weeds, it's 7 days.
Right.
Okay, they have 7 days to comply with that. If they don't, it'll come up for reinspection. At that point, it goes into our work order process. If it has not been mowed, we will issue a work order. It gets put on the list to get mowed, and then once it's mowed,
That's
then
when the name.
well, the bill is sent first, and it's 30-day terms, just like any other statement that goes out. If that's not satisfied in 30 days, then it becomes a lien. But a notice of violation was sent well
Right.
before
I understand
was
that.
ever
I
done.
was
And
just
then
wondering at what point is the owner notified that a lien may attach?
They're sent a
It's
bill.
in the statement,
And that-
when they get sent the bill, it lets them know that if they don't pay that within 30 days, that a lien will be assessed.
How often is that used relative to just sending it to collections through like the Code of Criminal Procedure? Is the lien a process that the department is relying on
Yeah,
a lot, or is it?
we'll send it, if they don't pay the bill, then it goes to collections or Lineberger.
Lineberger is the one that'll have it, you'll notice when you try to sell the property or whatever, you'll notice that, hey, it's gonna cost you, as you say, for $5,000 lot, it's gonna cost you $20,000.
Right.
All right, so, hey, I'll leave it there.
And there's two ways of looking at that, and I can, the gentleman said, hey, somebody messed up one time and they didn't mow their grass, but after the whole process is ran and we've sent notice and they refused to mow it, then they call the office, but you're talking about the lots, there's some accountability there, whether you didn't mess up, you just refused to mow your lot, let's face it.
Right.
You know, and there's not a messed up, it's, you refused to be a good neighbor, and now you've acquired
Right.
this lien. Simple. So, but on the flip side of that, if the property is something that somebody, whether they can't afford to mow it, they can't afford to pay the lien, and they don't wanna sell it, or they can't sell it, the lien is placed on the property, and it does not go against them personally. So we don't send their name to collections to create a hardship for them.
It follows the property.
It follows the property.
Just to clarify, I was a little bit confused, the separate notice of the lien being issued, it goes out with it, like when you send them the bill, say, hey, if you don't pay this, we're gonna
Yeah.
put a lien on your property.
Right, we send them
So
the
there
bill
is a
saying, hey,
separate
you owe
notice of it.
$200 for mowing this grass, and it's not that.
Is that provided for somewhere in the property maintenance code, or is that somewhere else?
I don't believe that's in the property
Goes
maintenance
back to
code.
chapter 13.
Well, actually, it's not in property maintenance
23,
code.
it actually goes up to 23.
It's in chapter 23.
23 of our-
Chapter 23.
Code of ordinance.
It's in chapter 23, a different code.
It's
Yeah,
in
code of
the.
It's our code of ordinances for the city,
That exists already.
All right.
so.
You know, the question, because I know it's 8 o'clock and the hour is bewitching, all right? And
I have one.
Okay, one more.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
because it's one that we all read and we said, what does that mean? And I'll just address this one, and 106.4, okay? It says, after due notice has been served, each day a violation is permitted to exist shall constitute a separate offense. Can you explain in lay language what that means, please?
That's easy. Ongoing violations are, it's a citable offense. The broken pipe example, we tell you, hey, your pipe is broken, and you have until Monday to fix it. You don't fix it Monday, citation. We come back Tuesday, the pipe's not fixed, citation. We come back Wednesday, the pipe's not fixed, citation. So each continuing day of the violation is a new citable offense.
That's what we were afraid of. So, I mean, it's not restricted to sewer breakings, okay? It relates to any violation, right?
After the notice, right.
After the notice, okay, so you get notified that, and, I'm sorry, screens, that you need to put some screens on. I don't do it, okay, that day. The next day, is it another citation? Another citation can issue?
Correct.
And another one the next day? For
Correct.
every day that I don't put that screen up, I've got multiple, so in 30 days, I can, so what, why do you give someone 30-day notice?
Well,
I mean,
it's after the
It's
notice.
after
the
notice.
notice.
It's after the
I'm sorry,
notice.
It's after,
the notice, right, so we say you got 30 days to fix your window screen. On the 31st day and ongoing.
you can be cited again,
You'll be done, you'll.
No, the first time, after 30 days.
After the 30 days, you'll be cited.
okay?
But if you don't fix it, 32, 33, 34, 35, you can be cited 32, 33, 34, 35, ongoing.
And those are, and,
Wow.
well,
I mean,
it's,
that's amazing.
well, it's amazing unless you're living next to a major issue and you want it resolved and you want some accountability. Is this something we use often? No. Have we used it before? No. And I'll use a prime example is the Casa de Santa Fe Apartments over off Antelope. We issued sewer citations probably 5 days in a row because the sewer was pouring into the storm drain and the kids were running through the sewer and the property owners, who are absentee landlords out of Austin, refused to fix it. I can tell you, after a week of writing citations, you know what, they fixed it. So is it?
Yeah. I imagine so, but, you know, in extreme, you know, situations where you're talking about, you know, nasty stuff like that where sewers are overflowing, that's one thing. But, I mean, if someone is told to, I mean, we could pick any violation in here that we wanted to. A fence post that's rotted, okay, because fences say that you've got to have those wooden slats that are rotted replaced, okay? And I'm issued the notice to correct it. And so that 30 days runs, technically, the individual, the code official can then cite them for a violation and take them to court. And what you're saying is on the 31st day, they can do it on the 31st day, and they can do it again on the 32nd day, and the 33rd day, and the 34th day, etc. All because, so they got, now, because they didn't get that wooden slat fixed on the by the 30th day, they may be facing 5, 6, 7 citations because of a fence slat that is missing. Is that,
Correct, that's correct.
Lord?
But as we
I mean,
discussed the
it-
entire
and
meeting,
yet,
this
at
has
this-
not been,
but at
this
the
is not
same
about, I
time-
got you, okay?
At the same time that they're going to file in municipal court, so they file in municipal court, and at the same time, they go in or, they do another citation.
You have several layers of discretion for the protection of the citizenry. On the first level of discretion is the code enforcement official, and he should be in communication with the person citing and be able to determine whether this condition warrants being cited daily, or if it should just be a one-time citation and take it to court. And then you have the discretion on part of the city attorney's office who handles the prosecution of these cases. And the city attorney's office has the discretion to dismiss cases that are unreasonable or excessive. And then the judge has the discretion of not finding guilty or reducing fines, or allowing for deferred adjudication. The prosecutor's office as well has the option to, and often does in these types of cases, allow people to do a deferred adjudication to allow them to remedy the situation so the case can be dismissed. And then your third line of protection, of course, is always your right to a jury trial, and you can take it to a jury of your peers and have them judge on the reasonableness.
But
of
it's,
the
if
citation.
it's strict liability, you know, I mean, what do you argue? I mean,
It's tough to argue,
that's,
but the judge has a ton of discretion in those cases.
Well, I think we're also forgetting another layer there, that what you're describing is, you know, in certain words, it's like an overzealous type of code enforcement officer. And we're forgetting that rank structure where the code enforcement officer doesn't operate in isolation. We all have a boss to answer to. That code enforcement officer has a supervisor, and then there's the captain, and then there's a commander, and then there's ultimately the chief of police, and then you have, you know, your city hall, people that are in place to prevent, the public or citizens getting mistreated. I think, the captain was explaining that really what we want the neighborhood to have is a strong voice on what you want in your neighborhood, what you'd like in your neighborhood, and the ability to empower all of us in the neighborhood to be able to say, hey, yeah, you know, you're overstepping your bounds there, and let us explain why. But also, if you have problems in a certain house, we want you to be able to tell us, hey, do something about this person. You know, we're tired of those high weeds, we're tired of the drug dealing that's constantly going on, and there's no electricity, there's no water, but yet this is going on, do something. I mean, it all comes back to the residents where you have to have a voice, you know? And I think we're all in agreement, from what I'm listening, that you guys want that, you wanna be able to have that.
And, you know, and I can count numbers on one hand, the time that we've issued multiple citations for property, and they're not against residents that have a broken picket or a screen, which I didn't, we've never issued a no screen citation, just for the record. But they are against absentee landlords, these apartment owners that don't live in the city. You know, probably 5 times that we've done this since the police departments took over, and it has always been at my direction. These code officers will come to their supervisors, and then me and Tracy will sit down, and I'll say, you know what, they're not getting the message, we need to turn it up. It's not the code officer running around, like they generating revenue. We don't generate revenue. Fact is, and I'll be very honest with you, I don't know how much revenue code enforcement has even generated for the city since I took over, because it doesn't come back to us. It goes somewhere into outer space, and who knows where it goes. But, so we don't make money off of issuing citations. My main goal, and you know, and hopefully I can close out the meeting with this, is, and like I said, we have to all trust each other and jump. We're a family here. We may live in different parts of the city, but we're all a family. I take a lot of pride in the city of Corpus Christi, and I have made a point to stay over in this part of town my career. And, you know, I was in narcotics before I came over here, so it's a big change for me, but I'm committed to this. This is something that I want to do. It's, you know, I still wake up in the middle of the night having dreams about police work, you know, but I enjoy this. And so we all need, as a family, to take steps to make sure that this ordinance works for the benefit of the citizens of Corpus Christi, the residents of the Hillcrest, and doesn't adversely affect the elderly and the poor. And the way we do that is, if we can find a volunteer who wants to work with us, that's fine. Mr. Williams' idea is great, but what we need to do is, we as a family need to know, okay, who are these elderly indigent people that have violations, and now that we've identified these violations, how do we help them? So we have to identify them. Mr. Williams, we as a community here, we should start working to find out, okay, which one of these people, Hillcrest is a small community, who here cannot take care of their problems, and what do we need to do as a community? And if you want to provide me with that list, when we identify these problems, then we immediately could take steps to resolve it. So, and I think that's the easiest thing to do. You know, I think Hillcrest is an easy fix as a community to fix. It's the rest of the areas in this city that are going to be more challenging to identify the indigent and the elderly. Hillcrest, I mean, it's a close-knit family. It's a small group over here. So that's what we need to do. But we're going to have to trust each other. If this thing was junk, I would tell you it's junk. But it's you know, we can what if and water it down all day long, and at the end we're gonna have a document that's not gonna be effective if we need it. And that's what I want, is if there's a point in here as a community where we need to address something, that we have the teeth to do it.
As long as we have communication.
And I welcome that.
I think that's it, and I think that's one of the biggest problems that Hillcrest has had.
Yes.
Is that we've had policemen that's come in and they use their authority.
Yeah,
and that's what has put up the barrier.
Yeah, and at the same and at the same token, I know we've done.
Now it's like y'all attacking, you know, blah blah this, because they've had this attitude to say, I gotta come in this neighborhood, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of it has been.
And at the same token, over years, we've done cleanups in Hillcrest, and there hasn't been a huge community turnout to help. And so I think we need, as a whole community here, we all need to throw in and say, you know what, we're unified in this. So, and I agree with you. I think the communication from the police side, the code side is warranted, that it needs to be better. And on the opposite side, though, I think us as a community in general, that we all need to open up. And, I mean, gosh, we were having festivals in the park years back. I mean, it's just, we've slipped. We need to get back where we were.
How do you get to be a contractor to cut the grass? I was thinking, you know,
I can make
the Alliance might want to become a contractor.
You should.
to
I
cut
welcome that,
grass.
sir. We need some
Yeah,
more.
we
So,
could.
We'll slap the lens on it.
Definitely.
Mr. Montes can answer that question.
I can ask, if you don't mind, I was gonna ask you a question. On one of the lines, you also had particularly paint. It was shipping paint or whatever as one of the violations or whatever. And that was a concern because, well, you know, we just feel like I think you've heard it several times, we feel like they were nitpicking,
right.
you know, and we feel like it was directed towards us. And that's the reason why all of these the flag just keeps coming up. Because the issue of paint, for one, is a major issue for the whole city, not just
You're exactly right.
Hillcrest, because you know, you have the issue of lead paint. Some of the programs that we have invited in our neighborhood no longer exist because the government will not allow for them to come in and sand and prep these, because of the lead paint.
The house was built prior to, you know, yes, exactly, so and I guess the question was grandfathering, but you answered that because you said, the house was born in 50, then the 50 standards.
That's right.
Born in 60, then the 60 standard. It was
So
born
crack
in
paint
70.
but crack paint is not.
Born at any time, right, exactly.
If you have crack paint, is the fact that it was built, you know, under an old code, that doesn't prevent it
No,
from
he's
being.
talking about the lead paint part
The
of
lead
it.
That's what I mean,
About
Yeah,
lead
the
paint.
lead paint.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're gonna have to get that out, I know that, but then, you know, that's a question for another day, as to how do I get that resolved if I know that Ms. Jones or Ms. Garcia has lead paint and needs, and you,
So we need to-
hopefully you don't cite her, but, because I know she's gonna have to get the whole house painted if she gets cited, all right?
Yeah, so there's several aspects. How do we get our house
Yeah,
painted because of lead paint?
Exactly.
And so, and I guess to start with, I'm not gonna give you an ultimatum that a house has to be painted and
Yeah.
not tell you how we're gonna have to reach there. If
Exactly.
we're saying that we would love to paint this house as a community, but we can't because we can't sand it, then I need to find some type of resolution of how do we get to that point. As far as the crack painting go, yes, it is in here, it is part of it. It's all over, and you're right, houses all over the city need to be painted.
You be
so-
citing everybody.
Yeah, and it's not,
It's in the old book as well.
it's just not, it's not something that, I mean, if a house, all the paint is off of it, and there's raw wood on there because it is so painted.
Yeah.
Then, and there's literally pieces of chips of paint left, then I would say it's an issue. If there's paint chipping, no, we have better things to do with our time, and everybody can drive around the city and see that. So, Mr. Williams?
Now, this has been a great meeting, and we've been here for 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Thank you.
And I think that we should, carry the crack paint and all of that over to the next time.
Is it possible that we could meet with the city attorney at some point just to talk about some specifics regarding specific provisions? Or,
Let me give you my card, and if you want to just
Okay.
email me those,
Okay.
I'll certainly review them, I have no problem with that.
okay, great.
And anybody else would like my card? What price?
Everybody wants your card
I'm
now.
That's why the city pays for them. This is your tax dollar.
Thank you very much. For the dime.
Yeah, you pay for those.
I thank you very much. Henry, you want to close this out?
Yes,
Henry, go close this out with a benediction.
yes, shall we have the benediction?
We're gonna have the benediction.
Now, shall we pray? Unless the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. Unless the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. And Father, we thank you indeed for this meeting this evening. We thank you indeed for Captain Blackman, for code enforcement, for the city attorney, for those on the city staff, for our neighborhood. May your blessings be upon us indeed to the good of our neighborhood, to the good of the city. Bless each and every one as we go our way this evening, and we give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Come on, for the thing, single family.